So my name is Hope McMath, HOPEMCMATH, and I am the founder and director of Yellow House.
Okay, and so for people who don't know what Yellow House is, just tell me a little bit about what that is.
So Yellow House is a place where art and social justice come together. So we do exhibitions, public programming, and community outreach that is focused around issues of racial justice, the environment, gender liberation, and lifting up youth voices.
Okay, and so tell me about this particular exhibit that you have, and yeah, just tell me about the exhibit.
Sure. So one of our current exhibitions, which is actually a virtual online exhibit, because when COVID hit, we had to take, as with the whole rest of the world, almost all of our programs online. And so this exhibition was born last summer, and it's entitled Sit In and Stand Up. And it was motivated by so many of the situations that were happening last summer. The murder of Breonna Taylor, the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery up in Brunswick. And so what we did is we invited local artists and graphic designers to submit artwork that was motivated by this moment of racial reckoning. And we realized that there was a really long, strong history of poster design when it comes to, you know, political campaigns, but also movements for social justice for many years, everything from women getting the vote to the civil rights movement. And so this sort of follows within that same path of artists shining a light on issues that matter in the moment. And we felt like this was a moment in which we wanted to document what was happening and sort of where we were as a country and as a local community.
Okay, and so I'm gonna, when I finish asking this question, I'm gonna mute my mic because I just realized that I have it unmuted and I don't know if the background noise is gonna pick up. But tell me about specifically the Breonna Taylor pieces that you have and why it's so important to honor her life and her tragic death.
So there are multiple pieces within the show. There's about 25 works in the show by 25 different local artists, focusing on Black and Brown artists. There are about a half a dozen that specifically lift up the image and legacy of Breonna Taylor. When this show was curated, Breonna Taylor was very much still on our minds as we were all grappling with her murder, dealing with issues of police overreach, police accountability, and a desire for justice. There is a really powerful work in the show by Jen Arevalo that shows Breonna Taylor holding the scales of justice. And she's juxtaposed in front of a graphic of a newspaper article with a headline that speaks about Breonna's murder. And at the bottom of the image is simply the large word that says justice. And I think justice is still something that we are all waiting for, hoping for, and demanding, not just in the case of Breonna Taylor, but so many Black lives that have been lost. There are other works in the show that riff off the idea of say their names. So there are a couple of images that actually show the face of George Floyd as well as Breonna Taylor and list the many, too many names of Black women and men that have been lost to police violence. So the show as a whole deals with all kinds of issues of justice and of finding our voice and of the power of casting our vote. But there is a pretty intense focus on the lost lives of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor.
Great. And so obviously it's virtual. So, I mean, I know personally because I work, I don't know if I told you this when we spoke earlier, but I actually write for our website and social media pages. So I obviously am familiar with, you know, analytics and things of that nature online, but for people who may not be familiar, how or have you been able to sort of gauge the reception of the exhibit, and how have you been able to gauge that, and sort of how has it been received, and to speak to its reach in the community?
So during the summer, when we launched this particular virtual exhibition, we also launched at the same time an exhibition helping to commemorate the 60th anniversary of Axe Handle Saturday, which of course is that really intense moment of white backlash and racial reckoning that happened here in Jacksonville when a group of young people were working to desegregate lunch counters. So we launched both of these exhibits at the same time with intention, because we were wanting to really focus on the fact that we have this history of protest and of backlash in our own history, but that it's still relevant today. So we had this sort of historic exhibition and a contemporary one. So when those both launched in the summer, they received a lot of attention and a lot of visibility, and they have continued to. Because of them being virtual, it means they're accessible all the time to people all over the world. And so we've had over 10,000 people visit those two exhibitions virtually, which is far more than we would ever be able to get within our intimate space of Yellow House, which is a beautiful gallery. But obviously limited to the people who can actually physically come there. The other thing that we did with the sit-in stand-up show is over the summer, when there was so much happening around the Black Lives Matter protests, we actually went out and did wheat paste, where we glued some of these posters up around the city on walls and abandoned buildings and abandoned vehicles. So they were also popping up throughout the streets of Jacksonville, as well as virtually. And of course, it's hard to gauge how many people might have seen those when they were installed. But it has been very well received, and we've had other artists interested in adding to the exhibition. And because it's virtual, we're going to be able to do that. We're going to be able to keep it a living, breathing art exhibit.
That's so cool. So just briefly, I know you were talking about the posters and the nature of like the type of design earlier, and I apologize, I haven't had a chance to look at them yet to ask questions about any specific designs. But just for my like understanding, so it's kind of like a political poster, or like kind of like a campaign poster style.
Yeah, so the style of these is very much within that sort of historic art of what you would consider protest posters or campaign posters. But because these posters are all made by different artists, they all have their own sort of unique voice, their own unique use of imagery and design, but they really fall within that historic trend of the kinds of graphic images that have been included in civil rights movements, since the founding of this country almost. So they are graphic design, and so they're powerful, they're symbolic, they're accessible to anybody to be able to quickly understand the message within the image. And because the ones that actually contain reference to Breonna Taylor show her face, we all know her face. We all know her name. We all know her face. And we all know the tragic death that occurred when police officers shot into her home, she and her partner's home. And so again, they're very clear in what they are putting forward as both a way to remember Breonna Taylor, but also as a way to demand justice.
That's wonderful. That was great. I was just going to ask, my last question is going to be, and I think you kind of touched on it somewhat just then, but as far as, you know, the importance of tomorrow being the anniversary of her death, sort of what does that mean for the community and for the movement and for the exhibit and everything like that, if there's anything you wanted to add on that note.
So I think now that we are at this 1-year anniversary of Breonna Taylor's murder, we also have just experienced the launch of the trial against the police officer who murdered George Floyd. This is a critical moment. You know, it's one thing for the movement to rise up when injustice happens, but the movement is also interested in what does justice look like as time marches forward. And I think we're seeing sort of intense attention in Louisville, but really across this country. And in our own community here in Jacksonville, there is a strong movement for change, for racial reckoning, for justice, for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for the young men and women whose lives have been lost in our own community, and for progress when we talk about how we build the world that we all truly want to live in, one in which all lives are valued, but at this moment in particular, that we recognize that Black lives really do matter.
Thank you so much. That was great. And if there is anything else just that you would like to add, or if there's any question that you think that I didn't ask but that you'd like to address, that's always sort of my last question in the end of an interview. I always give someone, give people the opportunity in case there's anything that, that they wanted to say, if they didn't feel like they got the opportunity to address.
There is one thing that I'll add briefly. You know, these issues are so large, but I feel like artists in particular have a very important part to play in these movements for change. Artists sometimes see through the noise. They help to take complicated issues and make them something that we can all focus on. And I happen to believe that artists are some of our greatest truth tellers. And in this moment, that's in part what we need. We need truth to be lifted up so that all of us can focus in that particular direction. The only other thing I would add is that the virtual exhibit at Yellow House is still very much alive. You can go and actually spend time with a couple of dozen poster designs that are all about protest and the movement for racial justice and change. You can learn a little bit about all of the various artists who are from our community. And all you have to do is visit yellowhouseart.org and go to the exhibition section and look for Sit In, Stand Up.